Nobody is willing to talk about it.
So there's some bad news. The timing of it could not be more ironic.
And I'm here to say, if we don't talk about these things out loud, it harms our souls. People take their own lives sometimes because they are in such deep distress. And so we have to learn how to talk about these things because this is happening in our own community.
I'm just getting ready to upload a little retort to Cardin Ellis and his foreword in the Antichrist playbook that I ordered a copy. And so I was responding. And then I jumped on a podcast and heard the news.
I am on your team. I am with you. I'm on your side. I care deeply about this church. You're my people. But I submit to you, I'm doing this from a place of goodness and of love and of compassion and of care.
A beautiful human, two beautiful humans, Valerie Hamaker and her husband. I think they're a beautiful example of what it is that I'm trying to share. Those of us that have left, many of us, we are not scary. We are not bad. We are not the scary, scary monsters that you think we are. I'm going to share it here. It's not going to have a lot of visual, anything super exciting that way, but their story is powerful and just further illustrates what it is that I, in my wacky, messy way, was trying to explain.
For those of you who have been paying a little bit of attention, we sort of gave a little bit of a spoiler alert yesterday on social media that we had an important episode that we were planning on dropping today. Things have unfolded in the life of Valerie and Nathan Hamaker and our sacred and holy work that we are doing here with you, connected to faith expansion in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to share with you not only what has unfolded in the last couple of weeks, but also we would like to offer to you a timeline of what we've been through.
Yeah. As we have done, so much work with the podcast and with the groups and things to help people, there's been a lot going on in the background that Valerie and I don't talk about much, but I think we need to at this point. And so we're going to be talking about some subjects that might veer a little differently from what we would normally talk about.
Thank you for that. I agree. We haven't been very forthcoming about what we've been experiencing in the last, I'd say maybe 18 months or so, mostly because I didn't want it to become a distraction from the work that I care about, which is the growth and healing of you all here in and around the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. That's what matters to me. And I didn't want, and I actually still don't want, what we've been through to be a chronic area of focus. It's important that we talk about this now because we want to make very, very clear how pure our hearts are and how earnestly and diligently Nathan and I have endeavored to be bridge builders and to create connection and to create dialogue with local ward and stake leaders here in the Kansas City area. However, notwithstanding our attempts to do so, on Monday, February 24th, 2025, Nathan and I both received a text message from our stake president that we were being summoned to a
church court.
Yeah. So what is it?
A membership council is the exact term.
Thank you. Yeah. I wasn't sure what we were calling it nowadays, but whatever the case is, we were summoned to this event, to this thing. And we were told that there was a formal letter that was sitting on our doorstep awaiting us. Nathan and I were away from each other that evening. He was away on a work assignment. And as you might imagine, this was pretty upsetting to us. I would say shocking in some ways, but not so much in other ways. We could see the writing on the wall based on our diligent efforts to help our fellow priesthood leaders understand what we've been through and what we're trying to do. And yet here we are. And so what we'd like to do today is walk you through the timeline. And we're going to end today's episode actually by sharing with you one of the very key components of the bridge building work that we have tried to do in the last 18 months when it seemed as if no help was forthcoming from our priesthood leaders in that they were not trusting our words. And so we actually offered to them the incredibly sacred testimonials of just a small handful of people with whom we have worked. We're going to close today's episode by reading some excerpts of the testimonials that were given to our entire stake presidency, our bishop, and then eventually to our Area Authority 70 as a way to communicate our diligent efforts to be instrumental in God's hands, to not only help heal people in faith and trust crisis here in and around the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but also to help heal mental health issues, to help heal relationships, and to help heal people's relationship with God. And many people have actually found healing enough to where they have a very peaceful relationship with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints itself through our work. As you can tell, forecast of things to come, I'm going to state the obvious right now. I get emotional over far less heated topics or emotional topics than this. And so I guarantee that will be part of this experience for you. And I am not even going to apologize, not because I am necessarily sad about this. I wouldn't say that's my predominant emotion, but I am feeling a lot of emotion because of the compassion that I feel and the passion that I feel about the work that I have done and plan to continue to do, and how it is just so incredibly challenging to know that what one is doing is the work of God and to be continuously misunderstood over and over again.
I think what you're saying is probably the thing that I'm feeling the most too, which is that I think our work is just continuously mischaracterized and misunderstood. And people have a hard time talking about difficult subjects. That's just a really uncomfortable thing for people in general. And then especially within a church system. And we found, and we're going to talk about this in more detail, but we found that it was just really, really hard for people to understand us and our purpose and our work and how we're helping people. So Valerie started the Latter-day Struggle podcast, what, about 2 years ago or so?
March of 2022. So it's been exactly pretty much 3 years ago.
So 3 years ago. And our objective has always been to talk about things in the church that are difficult and causing people pain, but to do it in a way to provide a psychologically healthy way for people to approach these topics and to improve the mental health and the spiritual health around these topics. But we began to notice that there was some pushback. And so we want to talk about a few of the events. So I'd say maybe about maybe 2.5 years ago, right when the podcast maybe was starting, Valerie had been invited by a couple of different bishops in our stake to come and speak about mental health with the youth. So she had been invited to do some Fifth Sunday, I think they were, discussions with a couple of different bishops in our stake. And I didn't attend, but my understanding was they went off swimmingly and got really good positive feedback from both the bishops, but also the members of those wards who attended as she discussed mental health. So maybe I'll let you pick up from there.
Yeah, I would say it was closer to probably 5 years ago.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Actually, yeah. And the reason why is because this was long before I even started the Latter-day Struggles podcast. And the reason why we want to share this as sort of the first point in our timeline is because this was my first interaction with the current stake president that is trying to excommunicate me and Nathan. And when I had this one or two, I can't really remember because I didn't realize this was going to become significant later on, but I had been invited to speak in a couple of Fifth Sundays. There had been some suicide amongst youth in our stake, and big surprise, I care a lot about the health of the people in my stake, in my ward. And so I was really grateful for the chance to talk to the youth and their parents about mental health issues, about understanding what depression looks like, how it may be atypical with adolescents, and how can parents know what's happening and how can they know how to talk to one another. And so when this was so successful, I already had the content planned. I guess I was anxiously engaged in a good cause, and I reached out to all of the bishops in the stake and asked them if they would like me to come and have these special parent and adolescent events with their wards, many of whom were very positive and said that would be amazing. Thank you. When we addressed the issue of Fifth Sunday, as we all know, there's only 3 of those generally, more or less, each year. And I offered to just come on another Sunday during a second hour because of the importance of the topic. And many of the bishops were very agreeable. And we started putting these on the calendar. Fast forward a couple of months, and I was a few days before one of these events, and nobody had confirmed with me. And when I confirmed with them, I found out that I had been canceled, and I wasn't even told I had been canceled, that they were no longer expecting me. And then shortly thereafter, we were called in by this counselor in the stake presidency, who now is our current stake president, and invited to come in and visit with him, at which time I received quite a harsh hand slapping for, I guess, disrupting the, how do you even say it, the patriarchal order? I don't even know how to, like,
the Sunday schedule,
but also the idea that a woman would get in front of her priesthood holders and initiate something without their permission, without it being their initiation or their idea, was found to be very inappropriate. And I hadn't spent a lot of time defending myself to stake priesthood leaders at that time in my life. And I, not surprisingly, was kind of speechless with shock, because nothing in me was trying to be rebellious. I just wanted to help.
And you did express that, and you expressed it tearfully. And I also was quite shocked. It was so mean. It was so cold. It was so rude. And, we tried to work with this gentleman and say we could go through the stake, but, we wanted to have these really positive experiences with the youth. We could do firesides. We could do, something. The way the conversation finally ended was, well, we don't need your help. And we have a prophet, and if there's a problem, we'll get direction from him. And I'm not gonna lie, I was pretty upset. This was probably the first time that I had been in a position where I saw you really hurt. I saw a priesthood leader being very harsh on you. There was no sense of thank you for your efforts. There was no sense of we appreciate what you're trying to do. We appreciate the successful meetings that you've already had and the good feedback that there was none of that. It was just this needs to end, and we'll get direction from the top. If we need anything, you're excused. And I was pretty upset. And so I was pretty defensive of you. And a few days later, the same counselor is in our ward. I approached him, and I kind of had the same conversation. I said, listen, I lost my temper, and I shouldn't have done that. At the same time, you really hurt my wife. And he looked me in the eyes and he said, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to hurt her. And I said, I appreciate that. And I said, will you please express that to her? And he said, okay. And then he never did. And so that was very disappointing.
It may or may not be connected to what later unfolded, because literally that was conversation number one I had with this individual. And I only ever had one more conversation with him to this day. And we'll get to that in a little while. But as Nathan and I were sort of processing this, and it's been many hours that I've taken in the last 2 weeks since the summons came for me to sort of make sense of this and try to better understand and have compassion on myself, honestly, about what I've been through. That I guess I kind of wondered if, as this has unfolded, if that sort of initial conversation set the stage for a misunderstanding of who I am and where my heart is. There may be unconscious threat that I pose, that I have a skill set and training that I want to share with my people, and that if I see a need, I want to serve. And I may or may not be someone who waits to be asked. I'm going to do what I think is right because that's who I am. And so fast forward to the fall of 2023, Nathan and I had been doing the podcast for a little while, actually. And I was serving in the primary, not heavily involved in, I guess, the adult relationships of the ward because I was so busy with the children, loving that. Nathan was in the youth with our teenage boys. And our temple recommends had expired. And we went in together to update our temple recommends. And it was at this point in time where, to this day, maybe the strangest thing that has ever happened to me happened that day. The bishop was noticeably very, very nervous, close to, I would say, a panic experience that we witnessed, and we actually paused and asked if we could help him, feeling nothing but love and compassion and just wondering what was going on. And he told us he would not give us a temple recommend interview. He
said he couldn't ask us the questions. He couldn't do it. And we sort of talked him through it and said, listen, we know how we feel about our relationship with God and our relationship with the church. We just ask you to ask the question and let us be our own judges and guides on this. And he just kept saying, I'm sorry, I can't. And then he said, maybe next week. And so we said, okay. And we left. I mean, the meeting actually ended pretty abruptly.
Well, and I think we were we were both quite shocked because there's no precedence to not be worthy enough to be interviewed for a temple recommend.
Right.
And Nathan and I have been in this ward and stake for over 20 years. We've served on any number of ward and stake councils for the majority of that period of time. And we're no strangers to the reality that a temple recommend interview is between ourselves and God. And they really, the priesthood leaders are assigned to simply read the questions. And we know that. And we reminded him of that. And I also gently reminded him that the concept of judge in Israel is a metaphor. It's not literal. And that we answer to God. And notwithstanding what seemed like was our generous attempt to reassure him that he didn't need to take upon himself what he was struggling with, we were asked to leave. Yeah. Fast forward, the next week comes, and Nathan had worked with and was concurrently working with the bishop in the priest quorum, and had incidentally spent quite a few hours with this very same bishop, actually really consoling him and helping him with some family issues that Nathan, by default, because of him being married to me and the time we've spent together and the reading he's done, was actually offering him a great deal of guidance and counsel on how to love his children well, even those who have left the church and things like that. And he was very gracious to Nathan and very excited to talk to some of these estranged children, and then abruptly told him that he still did not feel like we were worthy to be interviewed for temple recommends. And Nathan was then excused a second time. Yeah. And he actually excused me and said, I need to go call my son. You've given me some great advice, but no temple recommend interview for you. So I left. And both of these meetings, I was calm. I kept my cool. And I have had moments where I haven't. I will admit, this has been Valerie's biggest thing. This is going to come up later. She had a couple meetings where she's like, you're not invited. So. Well, and the reason for that is that Nathan's protective instinct around and connected to me is huge. Yeah. And he knows this, and I know this, and I've told him many times, I love you for it, but I need to be able to speak for myself. And when you get defensive and protective, it's not helpful. And so as things unfolded, we began to actually meet with these priesthood brethren separately, in part because I have a voice and I know how to use it. I know how to put words together, and I feel like I am capable and competent with these gentlemen. And Nathan wanted to also have an opportunity to speak for himself. And it actually unfolded quite well from that perspective, because each of us are individuals and we each have our own stories and we each have things that matter to us. And so we went. Well, it was better for me to not have you directly in the room so that I didn't feel like I had to be so defensive. And I know you're very capable. I just, it's just my nature. And so look, I'm not going to lie. I've had to apologize a couple times in the course of this outline to some people for losing my temper, but it wasn't every time. And many, many times we were just as respectful as we could possibly be. And so that brings us kind of to our next set of meetings. This was the first time, this refusal to interview us for a temple recommend, that we became a little bit more enlightened around, shall we say, the buzz that was happening in the ward and the stake. And I dare say that there's a unique set of circumstances that were unfolding. As I mentioned a minute ago, Nathan and I have been in the ward for 2 decades. I only say what I'm about ready to say to sort of offer context, which is that Nathan and I were kind of, I don't know, we were the paragons of orthodoxy. We were
highly traditional
and celebrated for that and reinforced for that and very much encouraged and trusted. And so as I received the call to serve you all in this population, it was very intentional, and it came from a lot of inspiration from my higher powers. And yet, as things unfolded, it caused, I guess, quite a bit of drama that we were not aware of, because Nathan and I are kind of just quietly living our own lives, raising our children, both of us working, doing our thing. And in an effort to maybe tell us how much he was protecting us, the bishop at this time actually informed us that he had been confronted many, many times in the last many months about the Hamakers. And I guess there was some combination of concern about the welfare of our souls, multiplied by some version of, you need to get rid of them and deal with them.
Yeah.
And from that moment on, I'm going to give myself grace here. It became pretty challenging to feel like I could show up at church and feel wanted and safe, because we were being talked about quite a bit. Nobody was talking to us.
Right.
They were talking about us. They were going to priesthood leaders about us. I was so, I guess, naively surprised, because I was thinking to myself, but I'm trying to help the church. I am really having a lot of success in helping people actually stay in a healthy connection with the church, even, independent of what their affiliation or attendance status is. I've maintained all along, I am on your team. I am not what you think I am. And so after that, things became more complicated, at least for me. And then they became exponentially more complicated because of another event that I'll talk about in a minute. But we appealed to the stake president at this point in time, because the irregularity of a bishop not willing to interview us for a temple recommend seemed so strange and unprecedented and not according to the church handbook of instructions, that we were certain that this would be a very simple conversation and we would be invited to be interviewed for a temple recommend, which we found out was not going to be the case.
Yeah, so we went in and talked to the stake president, and he basically said to us that he had talked to the bishop and he authorized the bishop to be a gatekeeper. He said to us, the bishop is a judge in Israel, and I've authorized him to be a gatekeeper. And if he doesn't feel like he should even interview you, I've told him that's okay. And so this is another one where I'm just like, wow.
And we've mentioned this because this comes up again when our sweet little missionary son was headed out the door for a mission. We've maintained with many levels of priesthood authorities that per our own theology, we answer the questions according to our own conscience. And if we are lying, then again, per the theology, we stand condemned before God, and that is not their responsibility. And we said to them, we are willing to take that risk. And we know that we don't believe in that kind of God, and that we know that God would want us to be with our son, to support him in his desires to serve a mission. And that fell on deaf ears over and over and over again. And so 2 different times we are now told that we are not eligible for even an interview to enter into the temple. And we're kind of getting pretty discouraged at this point in time. Nobody had at any point in time nobody ever told us to stop the podcast. That never happened.
No, and actually, and very interesting, both the bishop and the stake president at this time told us in one of the meetings that they had specifically prayed about the work you were doing and had received a spiritual impression that it was okay. So they had received spiritual impressions it was okay, but there were certain elements of the podcast they didn't like. And so they were not comfortable with the temple recommend portion of our membership, apparently.
And so, as you might imagine, this is very confusing. In each and every one of these conversations, I maintained that I knew that what I was doing was a call from God, and that I was addressing and working with a very unique demographic of our church that was in a lot of pain. And I was doing it because I had been asked by God, and I had been prepared by God to help people who were suffering in a very unique way. And I had the ability to do that because I am deeply committed to my own origin faith. I understand Mormonism. I'm a good Mormon girl. I've been doing this thing for a long time. I understand our beauties and our wounds and our struggles and our strengths. But I also have the psychological training to be able to hold space for varying experiences and not have my loyalty or my insecurity or my fear get in the way. And so the stake president at this point in time was pretty ambivalent about how to handle the Hamakers. And then what unfolded next was kind of a strange, I don't know. Yeah. I used to think it was kind of a miracle, but here we are.
I think it was a miracle. It just didn't pan out the way we hoped. So in December of 2024, Valerie was out of town and I was in testimony meeting. So the 1st of December, 2024, I was in testimony meeting, and out of the middle of nowhere, a gentleman from our ward who I didn't know very well gets up and shares a testimony. And mind you, both our bishop and our stake president are present at this meeting. And this gentleman gets up and he bears his testimony and he says something to the effect of, I'm one of 5 or 6 children and all of my siblings have left the church. And I am really struggling with a lot of things in this church as well. But I want to say that because of Valerie Hamaker's podcast and because of the Faith Matters Foundation, I have found a way to stay in the church. And I'm very grateful to those two groups or those two podcasts because they've talked about important things. And he specifically cited stages of faith and how important it was for him to learn about stages of faith so that he knew that being in what amounts to stage 3 of faith was not unusual, in fact, expected, and something that most people need to go through in their journey. And I was listening to this and I was astounded. I was like, oh, this is amazing. And I talked to him about it afterwards. And he said, yeah, I was sitting next to my wife and I had this really strong impression to get up and share my testimony, which I never do, and to talk specifically about Valerie Hamaker's podcast. And so after that meeting, I ended up meeting with the stake president again. And he was a little bit different. His tone was different. And he kind of asked me a couple questions about what this gentleman had mentioned in his testimony. And I had the opportunity to talk about stages of faith and how this gentleman's experience in listening to our podcast in many cases strengthens faith, strengthens an understanding of the faith journey, and helps people navigate what was otherwise a very negative relationship with the church. And it can become a very positive relationship with the church. I said, what he said today is a microcosm of what we hear all the time. And I really thought this was going to be a turning point. I really thought so.
Well, and it seems in some ways like it kind of was, and we'll kind of unpack that here as we go. So Nathan comes home from church. I actually start receiving texts from, I got one from you and then one from a dear friend of mine who was sitting in the ward. And she said, you're not going to believe this. Somebody just talked about your podcast and their testimony. And Nathan comes home and shares this with me. And I was very touched, of course, but more so than anything, I could not believe that there was somebody in my ward that would publicly confess that what I was doing was meaningful to them. Because I understand enough about the demographics of the church to know that there was probably a decent number of people that were suffering and were in pain and were in faith crisis and probably honestly were listening to my podcast, but nobody is willing to talk about it because of the culture of fear around suffering and struggling with one's faith. And so I followed up the next month, much to my trepidation. I decided that I wanted to do probably the bravest thing I've ever done in my life. This was terrifying for me. I decided to stand up in testimony meeting in my ward and share it with my own people, with my congregation, what I was doing and why. And that it was because I have received a call from God and that I want the church to feel like a safe space for everyone. And I can remember pretty vividly what I said because I really thought about it. And I wanted to be incredibly careful and respectful to all of the stages of faith sitting in that room. And so to the best of my ability, I will try to remember what I said. I got up and I said, we all are here doing our best, trying our hardest to find God. And each of us has special gifts and talents and responsibilities. And sometimes these show up as opportunities to serve in the church. I said, I received a calling from God a long time ago that I was going to be asked to help a lot of people. And I didn't know if it had to do with church or my counseling profession. I didn't know what that meant. But in my testimony, I just sort of, I kind of brushed over it. I gave a lot more detail about this experience to both of the stake presidents, to the bishop. I vulnerably sort of bore my soul about how this was a spiritual call. So in the ward in front of the congregation, I was a little bit more vague, but I said, I have been asked and I have chosen to serve a special population in our church. I'm working with people who are struggling with faith crisis. And if this is something that is unfamiliar to you, if you've never heard about it, if you don't know anybody who's ever experienced this, then I could not be more happy for you. And I love that for you. However, I dare say that there are probably many of you in this very room who either have felt this themselves or know and love someone who has. And I'm here to say, if we don't talk about these things out loud, it harms our souls. It causes mental health issues. It interferes with marriages. It causes people to struggle with depression. People take their own lives sometimes because they are in such deep distress. And so we have to learn how to talk about these things because this is happening in our own community. And I care about our community and God cares about this community. And so I want you all to know that I am on your team. I am with you. I'm on your side. I care deeply about this church. You're my people. And I think Jesus Christ wants these places of worship to be places where everybody feels like they are welcome, no matter who they are and what they're struggling with. And I'm trying to create spaces where these things can happen. And I'm trying to help people learn how to talk to one another about these things. And I understand that this is probably scary for some of you because some of the things I talk about are uncomfortable. But I submit to you, I'm doing this from a place of goodness and of love and of compassion and of care for God, for this religious system, and for our families. And then I sat down and I actually was really darn proud of myself. I did a good job and I was so scared.
And it was beautiful. And several people after you stood up and thanked you for your words. And they said, we appreciate that. And we appreciate what you do. The testimony meeting goes on and the bishop stands up at the end. the same bishop that wouldn't give us a temple recommend interview, the same bishop that we helped a lot with some of the struggling relationships with his own children, the same bishop who said that he agreed with a lot of things that we talked about and had prayed about our podcast and had received a confirmation that we were doing a good thing. So he stands up at the end of the meeting and says something to the effect of, there's a lot of people in this ward who have complained about the Hammakers podcast to me. And he's like, I just want to say that we all need to do a better job of trying to be unified and get along with each other. And then he says, the Hammakers know I love them, but that I don't agree with the content of their podcast. And then he says,
I've had them in my office many times.
I've had them in the office many times, which for Valerie was only once. I had talked to him more than once, but for Valerie's only once. And then he said, I've also talked to the stake president about them. And the stake president specifically told me, just love them. And so I'm saying to you, all of you in the congregation who have had trouble and problems with Valerie and Nathan, to just love them. Now, remember, we're here, okay? We're in the audience. So just love them. And then he says, and remember, we all have bad kids in our families. And just like we would always invite our bad kids to still participate with us in Christmas dinner, please continue to love and include Nathan and Valerie. And I'm kind of in shock. With us present, he just talked about confidential meetings. He just totally trashed the podcast, which is not what he told us in private. And he just referred to us in front of our whole congregation as the bad kids that still needed to be invited to Christmas dinner. So yeah, this was a hard meeting for us.
I was in so much shock that, well, as Nathan was, he was sitting next to me, and I was really feeling pretty good about how I had felt the prompting to sort of stand up and really invite a lot of love and compassion. And I don't know, like we're in this together. We don't need to turn this into something that is adversarial, because I'm not who you may think I am. And so I was sort of sitting there just basking and like, I was really proud of myself and thinking this is a turning point. And when the bishop stood up, Nathan grabbed my hand and he's like, oh no. And by the time that ended, all I can remember is stumbling out of the chapel and making my way to the car and sobbing, because for a couple of reasons, it was obviously so embarrassing, humiliating to be publicly shamed like that. And then also I was concerned about anybody who was actually having struggles with their faith, that they now knew that this was not a safe space for them. They would go underground because the one person who had the courage to speak about it publicly was being punished publicly for her courage. So to make a long story short, Nathan asked him to come up. He invited him to our home and asked that he apologize. And we had a long conversation. I asked him to publicly apologize.
Well, and this is after he said, yeah, I shouldn't have done that. He confessed. He said, I shouldn't have said those things. And we were very calm and nice. And we said, would you just please apologize to the ward for what you said? And he said, yes.
And that never happened. And so we move into a chapter of more insecurity, I guess is the easiest way for me to put it, at least. I think you were doing a little bit better than I was at that point. Maybe not. Maybe that was sort of a turning point for you. I was already feeling very insecure after he had told us that he was doing so much managing of everybody coming in and sort of complaining about us. And that was harder for me than I feel like it was for you.
Yeah, that didn't. I mean, I thought it was childish. And I had said to him, if people want to come talk to us, send them our way. We can chat with them. But nobody did. Nobody came to our house and said, hey, help us understand you better. So in the end, I just... Yeah, I don't think it bothered me as much as it bothered you.
I struggled moving forward, still attending, but feeling more and more unsafe. And also just this very strange sense of almost like a paradoxical experience of having these incredibly sacred experiences over and over and over again throughout the week with all of you through the production of my show, but also through the inspiration and guidance and direction that I felt in what content to produce and how to move forward. And then my growth and processing groups and my consulting, and just feeling that my mouth was filled over and over again, and knowing with an increasing surety that what I was doing was and is God's work. And then, of course, the opposite extreme being that I was feeling more and more like I was moving into a place of rejection and danger. The next thing that happened after the stake president heard the gentleman in our ward speak about how the work that we were doing was so instrumental in the development of his faith, is our stake president actually, I don't remember how it all went down, but we had another meeting, and it was a very, very different meeting, and he was very receptive. And I had received some counsel from some of our great elders of the church. I talked to Carolyn Pearson, I talked to Greg Prince, and a few other people, and I was asking for counsel on how to move forward. And on Greg's recommendation, I reached out to the stake president, bearing in mind that this gentleman is a family friend of ours before he was the stake president, and we've had many, we've gone on family events together, and we've got a good rapport with this gentleman. His wife is a wonderful woman and was in one of my presidencies when I had a stake calling, and so I asked him if he would be willing to spend some time with me, not in his office, not in his suit and tie, behind his desk. I was essentially trying to diminish the power differential. And I said, will you please come to my home, and I'd be happy to talk to you about what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. And to his credit, he agreed. And for the next many months, we spent several hours in his plain clothes, ironically in my office instead of his. And we had some incredibly sacred, healing conversations where I felt he was open and curious and interested. He shared with me after I said to him, I don't expect you to believe that I feel like this is a calling from God. And he says, I actually do believe that. I feel it. And throughout this chapter of our time leading up to this moment, he initiated that he was wanting to have these conversations because he was getting ready to be released. And he wanted to be able to create a bridge between ourselves and the next stake president, whoever that was. That was explicitly the reason for our gathering for many, many hours. And it was so successful that at the end of, 2-3 meetings that were over an hour long each, I didn't even really feel the need to meet with him more because we were so aligned and I felt so seen and understood that I wasn't worried anymore. I felt certain that whatever unfolded, it was going to be okay because we had an advocate. We had somebody who understood us. Is there anything you want to add?
Yeah. So, I wasn't in those meetings with you in particular, but at the end of the last meeting, when you guys finished and came up from your office into the foyer, and as he was leaving, I was a witness to a conversation where he said to you, I feel like I understand you. I understand you're trying to help families. And he specifically said in my presence, I'll do as much as I can to be a bridge with the next stake president based on what we've learned. I heard that myself, and which makes the rest of the story so surprising.
He gets released a couple of months later, and there's actually a little bit of radio silence for pretty much the whole summer of, what would that have been, 2024?
Mm-hmm.
And where I am at this point in time is thinking that this gentleman, the previous stake president and personal friend of ours, had sat down with the new stake president, who was his previous counselor. So they're well acquainted with one another. And I really actually was feeling very comfortable. I was really feeling quite confident that we were in good shape, that we had a different perspective, but that we were instrumental in helping this very, very unique demographic of the church, and that they knew and understood that we were truly on your team. End of summer 2024, we get a call from stake executive secretary summoning me and Nathan in to the new stake, not just the stake president, but the entire stake presidency, wanting to know our hearts.
Right. And our bishop.
Right. So it had the feeling almost of like a little bit of like a mini
Inquisition.
And I was shocked. I don't know. I feel like I'm very naive. I might continuously shocked over and over again.
Yeah. So the executive secretary says to me, this is not a membership council. I'm like, well, that's good. He says, we just want to get to know your hearts.
This is once again surprising to us, because when one prefaces something like this is not a membership council, and we didn't even know we were on any sort of seat at all, much less a hot seat, we're a little bit alarmed, to say the least. However, I immediately reach out to the former stake president and I say, hey, I think we're in need of that thing that we've been talking about. What's the plan? Are we getting together? Did you want to meet with him? I kind of already thought he had met with him. I'm baffled at this point in time, but I'm actually doing okay, because in my mind, it's like, well, maybe there's been crossed wires. I know that there was our wards were sort of being shuffled. They're busy, whatever. And so I, in my naivete, am just certain that people can be trusted to keep their word. And from that day to this, we have heard nothing from that previous stake president.
And we texted a couple times and said, hey, we could really use your help. We'd like your input. We'd like you to attend the meeting. And actually, my very last text to this gentleman was, I thought we were friends. More than just, hey, it's not about this particular meeting. The radio silence is hurtful. We did things socially with your family. We've been out to dinner as couples. It's like, I thought we were friends. And he didn't even respond to that text.
I became more and more frantic, because I was like, oh dear, we are alone in the world. Like, I don't think he's going to help us. And he's not even responding. And at one point in time, I said, are you okay? Like, maybe he's not well. And I just couldn't fathom somebody betraying and abandoning us like this, that I reached out to his wife because I thought, I know what it is. He has a new phone number. That's it. I just couldn't fathom. And she didn't respond either. And I will say, of all of the pain I felt, this one was the biggest one, because we spent hours together, me sharing sacred experiences of why I'm doing what I'm doing, because I care about our people, about God's children, and feeling like I'd really offered my whole heart to this situation, and really believing that he was receiving it. I think I would have even understood if he had reached out and said, I'm so sorry, I've done everything that I can, but I don't have the authority to fill in the blank. But we didn't even get that. And so we move into the next chapter, where we went ahead and Nathan and I separately decided to meet with this new stake presidency and the bishop. I met with my Relief Society president, who actually is a dear friend and I guess an ally of the work that we do, somebody who is a feisty millennial and understands the deep need for the work that Nathan and I do. And I had a meeting with these 4 gentlemen, and then Nathan had a meeting with another gentleman in our ward who also is an advocate.
Well, the same one who shared his testimony. So I went into a meeting with the stake presidency and my bishop, and I brought with me our friend who had shared his testimony a few months previously about the power of the podcast and helping him stay in the church. And I spent an hour talking to the bishop and stake presidency about my own faith journey and about how I was learning to see the world more expansively and more inclusively, and that some of my children had been on a faith journey, and Valerie had been on a faith journey. And it was spilling over, not just into how we saw the church, but in how we saw God's children and how we wanted a more egalitarian society for everyone to be involved. And that I had left my place of employment because they were starting to put pressure on me to do things that were, I considered to be dishonest. And I was willing to lose my job in order to maintain my integrity. And I shared my love for the marginalized people. I shared my love for our ward has suffered 3 suicides in the last 10 years. And I shared my love for those souls that we've lost who struggled with various things, and friends that are in the LGBTQ community, children and women who have been victims of abuse. I said, my goal is to have a church where everybody is safe and everybody feels included. And if you want to know my heart, that's my heart. And then my friend shared his journey as well, and how instrumental the podcast again was in helping him stay connected to the church when every single one of his siblings had left.
And his parents.
And his parents had left. And again, we shared our hearts, which is what they asked us to. And I shed tears, and my friend shed tears. But I was also concerned because the stake presidency and the bishop, they just stared at me blankly the whole time. I wasn't connecting with these gentlemen. I didn't feel like they were understanding my heart, even though that's what they wanted to do. My friend, who had attended the meeting with me, as we walked out afterwards, he pulled me aside in the parking lot, and he said to me, I am concerned after that meeting that they may actually excommunicate me now too for sharing what I shared, because I don't think they liked what I shared. And I said, no, that's not going to happen. But he had reason to feel concern because there was very little emotional involvement from the stake presidency. No one said, man, that must have been hard. No one was able to mirror our emotions. No one was able to mirror that these experiences must have been challenging for the two of us. And so I sensed that maybe the meeting hadn't gone as well as I'd hoped.
So I met with them before Nathan had met with them with the gentleman that he was referring to. And it was a very strange experience for me. I'm getting a little bit more accustomed to strange experiences because I feel like that's what's happening does it count as strange if it's all the time? But I decided within myself that I had a couple of choices, that I could go in there and I could be defensive. I could be frustrated, which I have felt a little bit of frustration that I just over and over and over again feel like I'm having to explain myself to these men that don't understand who I am. They don't understand my professional obligations. They don't understand my heart. And on my bad days, I just am frustrated that I am spending a lot of mental energy hitting my head against a brick wall. And I think I was also suffering from the betrayal of the former stake president. I'm not going to deny that was a real hit to me, because it led me to believe that I was being supported. And so I recognized that I could make a choice. And the choice I made, by the grace of God and because of my superpower being that I love reading books and I read them all the time, and they've been very healing and instructive to my soul. And so it happens to be that I have been reading the Course in Miracles for a very long time. I just read a chapter a day. And I decided that I was going to spend my time preparing to meet with these gentlemen by praying for them and by leaning into how much God loves each of them, and by trying to see them as God sees them, and by trying to imagine what it must feel like for someone as diligent and loyal and trying to protect something that they love so much to feel like it's being attacked. I was really trying to understand what it must feel like to be them in the face of how they were experiencing me and Nathan. And so I met them from a place of love and compassion. And I really tried to frame my conversation with them around the reality that they were experiencing. I'm not going to say it was an objective reality, but it doesn't matter if it's objective, if it's theirs. And having been Orthodox for most of my life, I think I probably could map fairly clearly what they were probably feeling, because I would have felt that way too not very long ago. And so I met them just feeling an outpouring of love and compassion for them. And I vulnerably shared with them some very sacred personal experiences I have had leading me to this point. Because going way back to being called to be a sister missionary, serving in a visitor center, learning how to public speak, I have seen, and I can see to this day, the stepping stones that have led me to the skill set that bring me here today. And I shared with them how I came by the work that I'm doing, and that God has been in every detail of it. When one of them asked me, how do you choose what to talk about? I quickly said, I feel impressions about what is needed, what my people need, what our people need. And I won't belabor all of the details of the meeting other than just to say, I communicated to them my heart, that my heart was to serve and to heal and to be helpful to people that were in pain and suffering in our church. And I don't mind saying that I knew, again, having spent much of my life in Orthodoxy, that what they needed to hear was that I am helping the church. And I feel very comfortable saying that because the work that we're doing is helping the church. It's helping people heal who are then able to have a healthy and peaceful relationship with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Some of them through ongoing affiliation, some of them through other means of worship, but they're able to appreciate and enjoy parts of their identity that are very much a force for good in their life that they learned here through the LDS Church. I also help people in mixed faith marriages, in mixed faith families, which are more and more becoming the norm. And I walked through with them all of the ways in which I am desperately committed to being an instrument in God's hands amongst our people. Now, as Nathan's experience unfolded, mine was very much the same in that I'm over here having this really authentic experience. And so in my own integrity, I am feeling really, really confident in myself. And yet I'm having the distinctive impression, at least from my perspective, that I am talking to a wall. Now, I can't speak for one of the two counselors who I think had his eyes in his lap the entire 60 to 90 minutes that we were there. But I will say it became very clear that, at least I guess I can only speak for my own experience, that what I was saying did not matter.
Right.
It did not matter.
That was my impression too.
And there was nothing that I could say that would penetrate what had already been determined. And I walked out of that room in a very strange state of both feeling profoundly validated that I had entered into that space and in my own integrity, and with no regrets, but also recognizing that before I dropped the first podcast episode, I surrendered my membership to God, basically saying to them, if you want me to do this, I will do this. And I know what the cost could be. And as this is unfolding, it became clear that there are certain individuals, for their own valid reasons, and whom I have compassion for, that cannot hear and will not be able to understand the sacred nature of the work that we do. And there is nothing I can do about that. And also, I will continue to do what I feel called to do. As a matter of fact, as we were walking out the door, this gentleman said to me in a way that seemed quite out of the blue and incongruent with all of the things that had been discussed thus far, because I feel like I'd made my passion abundantly clear. He said, so what do you plan on doing moving forward, Sister Hamaker? And I looked him in the eye with all of the love and passion and compassion that I have. And I said, I plan to continue to do exactly what I'm doing right now because it is working and it is my call from God.
So you had this great experience, and our Relief Society president, like you mentioned, attended with you and was a great advocate for you and your work. And after my meeting, I asked the stake presidency for a second meeting because I wanted to discuss my son who was getting ready to go on a mission. He was preparing to go to the temple, and I wanted to revisit the temple recommend. And so they agreed. And we did have a second meeting shortly after my first meeting. And this meeting went a little differently. I didn't have a witness with me, but they basically said to me, we're not going to give you your temple recommend that you request.
Well, not even an interview.
Yeah, you're not even going to get the interview. And they said, there are too many things in your podcast that you say that violate the questions of the temple recommend. They said, and specifically, they named three things. They said, we don't like your podcast about tithing after the SEC scandal. So what I said is that, yeah, Valerie and I felt that until the church was more transparent and honest about its funds and acknowledged the crimes that it was convicted of, that we felt that our tithing could be spent in other godly causes. So he referenced that. And I said to him, listen, if that is the hang up, I give you my word that I will return to paying tithing to the church if that's what I have to do to go to the temple with my son. I said, 100% consider it done. And then he said to me, well, it's not just that. He says, you are getting in front of the prophet by suggesting women should hold the priesthood and that we should allow LGBTQ, members of the church to be in full fellowship. And I said to him, I have never said that the church has to change its policies. I've never addressed the prophet on the podcast and said, President Nelson, change these policies. All I have ever said, and all I've ever suggested, and all Valerie has said and suggested is this: if the church continues to use these doctrines and policies and practices that it has now, it will also continue to have mental and emotional health consequences. We have never called specifically on the church to alter anything, but we have said, if we continue to do this, we will continue to have these problems. And if we don't change some of these things, we will continue to have suicides and mental health problems. And he said to me, this is the kind of behavior that leads to people not just breaking away from church, but starting their own churches. And I said, that is not what we're doing. I was like, we 100% support the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and the mission that it has to bring a message of the love of God to all the world. We are not trying to form our own church. So then he says, you know that God has said, if you love me, keep my commandments. Again, specifically referencing, I think, the LGBTQ policies of the church. And I said back to him, my understanding of Jesus's teachings is that all of the commandments are based in love God, love your neighbor, and love yourself. He said, on these two laws, love God with all your heart, mind, and strength, and love thy neighbor as thyself. He said, on these two laws hang all of the laws and all of the prophets. And so all I try to do is hold up anything we talk about to those two standards, which is really just one standard, right? To see the world through the eyes of love. And I said, and I don't care if somebody sees it differently than me. In fact, the whole premise of our podcast is each individual gets to have their own integrity on how they apply the law to love in their own particular lives. And so if you don't agree with me, that's totally fine. But can we just agree that it's okay to see things differently, and that my wife really, really wants to just help people who are in pain to understand that the law of love should bring people in and not drive them away. And so anyway, we went kind of back and forth on this. And then in the end, he said, as long as you are trying to get in front of the prophet, you cannot have a temple recommend. And so I had to drop it.
Our sweet little, he's not very little, but our son, our third child, ended up having to go to the temple without us. And that was really painful for all of us. We were so distressed by the fact that we were not even allowed interviews, that we appealed to every level of the church up to the quorum of the 12 apostles for somebody to step up and do the right thing and allow us to be interviewed so that we could support our own child wanting to serve God, just like his mom and dad did. He's heard me and Nathan talk about the blessings of our mission service his entire life, and he's just wanting to be like his mom and dad.
Yep.
And I don't know how soon he will recover from how he was impacted by the unwillingness of our priesthood brethren to either follow their own handbook and interview us, or when it comes to the gentlemen that are higher up the line, to advocate for their own handbook and for also that which is just right, to allow us to answer for ourselves.
Our son was affected by it, although he went through the temple with some good friends of ours, and I think had a very positive experience. He related to me afterwards when he was in the MTC that he spoke to almost every missionary in his district, on his floor, anybody that would listen, and told them that we were not allowed to go to the temple with him because of our support for LGBTQ support in the church and our support for a more egalitarian structure for women in the church. And oddly enough, he related back to me, every single missionary he talked to said anything from that's crazy to that's BS, not using the euphemism BS. And you know why? Because that generation understands that our institution needs to be an institution where every person is safe. And so all of his MTC companions were like, yeah, that's crazy. They got it. They got it. When our son was going through this process, in both his temple interview and his mission interview, the stake president specifically asked him about our podcast and what his opinion was. And that may not feel like a big deal, but you have to think about it from the perspective of a 19-year-old boy, because what he's hearing when the stake president says, you know, what about your mom and dad's podcast? What he's hearing is, I don't like your mom and dad's podcast. I think your mom and dad are troublemakers or worse. And now I need to know, young man, are you loyal to them or are you loyal to the church? Which in our stake president's mind was the decision he had to make here. And our son gave a marvelous answer. He came back afterwards and told us, he said, all I said, Dad, was, I don't listen to my mom and dad's podcast, so I don't know what they talk about. But I know this. My mom and dad love people. They talk about love in our home. They talk about kindness. They talk about service. And I believe they are sincerely trying to help people. That's what I said. Good job. Because that is what we believe in. And it defrayed our stake president trying to pit our son against us.
Yeah. I'm hopeful, and I want to give the stake president the benefit of the doubt that I don't believe he was maliciously trying to set our son against us. And yet at the same time, it puts a young man in a painful position to feel like he's having to justify his parents or justify the church to his parents. I don't know, all of the various ways this could have gone, but to our son's credit, he was able to navigate that in a way that was really quite lovely. And just to recognize that we are a family, that we gather together every night and we have a devotional with our children. We pray with our children. Those things have blessed our family and will continue to do so. And so what I think was internalized in our son is, I don't know exactly why this is happening and why you're treating my parents this way, but I know my parents and they are good. And I suppose as the years go by and he continues to mature, we'll need to continue to work with him on what he was put through at this chapter of his life.
Yeah.
We appealed to, as I mentioned, the higher levels of the hierarchy at this point in time. And I want to make clear that as this was unfolding, this was very stressful, to say the least. And yet also at the same time, I have felt to my core an increasing degree of confidence that independent of the outcome of these situations, I have no need to feel as if I am doing something wrong. And so even a couple of years ago, if I had been able to sort of future cast and see myself having a very candid conversation with an Area Authority 70, I think I would have died of fear and trepidation. And yet at the same time, as I have matured and found confidence in my work and in myself, in great part because of you out there and your feedback and watching your lives change and heal, my confidence has grown. I think often about one of my favorite quotes. It's by Lord Alfred Tennyson. And he says, "My strength is as the strength of 10 because my heart is pure." And so right before our son went to the temple, as we were going through trying to find somebody that could overturn what we were considering the madness of not being eligible to receive a temple recommend interview, we had a long conversation with an Area Authority 70 who we happen to already know. We've been in this area for over 20 years. We've been in all of the callings. And so it was a fairly comfortable conversation because this was not a stranger to us. And we're also getting old enough that they are not like our grandpas or our dad's age, right? They're getting closer to being peers to us. And we had what I would consider to be one of the more candid conversations with any of the men that we've talked to with this Area Authority 70. Of course, it, in the end, yielded no progress. And yet I did feel in the moment that he was able to at least conceptualize the complexity of what we were experiencing, perhaps more than any of the other priesthood leaders that we had talked to thus far.
Yeah. To his credit, he said multiple times in the conversation, I can see why this is complex. I can see why this is complicated. These are not easy questions. These are not easy decisions. And that's really the first time anybody had said that to us.
Yes.
And I appreciated that.
Me too.
You know, even though he had no ability to do anything on our behalf, I at least felt like somebody was saying, yeah, this is a hard situation.
One of the things that I have found very painful throughout this process is what seems to be the fallback of many of these gentlemen is an appeal to sort of the appropriate line of authority as a way to not stand up and advocate for what is right.
Right.
And that really seemed to have happened over and over again. What you're saying makes sense, but this isn't my problem, or I don't have this. This is not my jurisdiction. I don't have authority over this. And that to me was so painful because I'm of the opinion that independent of what one's formal hierarchical duties and responsibilities are, we owe something greater to God than the following of a line of authority or what the formal responsibilities and assignments are. We owe something to our own integrity. And I was appealing to these gentlemen over and over again to stand up and do the right thing because it's the right thing, giving them an opportunity to move beyond the institutional structure of how things ought to be done according to, the proper priesthood line. And
well, and we talked about that. I talked about Matthew 23, and I said, Jesus, when he was talking to other church leaders, said, paying tithing, doing the rituals does not take precedence over the weightier matters of the law, of love, of mercy, of justice for the poor, of faith. And that he said, we strain at gnats and swallow camels. And I said, I don't want that to be the case for our church. I want our church to put justice for the marginalized, faithfulness, love, and mercy as our primary core, as Jesus did in Matthew 23. But I think it's hard. Our church teaches a lot about the importance of falling in line. And so I think it's hard for people to see when sometimes those two come into conflict with each other.
Well, I had, I thought, a very, very productive conversation around this topic with this Area Authority 70, and you were sitting there, Nathan, so you can kind of jump in as you think of things. But one of the things I said to him is I said, what we're experiencing is the clashing of two different worlds. I am a mental health professional. I specialize in relationships, and I have a lot of advanced training in dealing with trauma. I am beholden to my licensure as a professional, and I need to continue to practice according to empirically validated standards of practice. And that is independent of what any individual, male or female, prophet or otherwise, says. So when I am working with somebody, and were I to invite them to follow a church leader, and in so doing, I risk sending them away to commit suicide, would you have me do that, Brother Area Authority 70? And he said, of course not. And I paused and I said, thank you for saying that. And then he said, you need to do what is ethical and mentally healthy for your individuals in private. And then you need to switch gears and publicly tell everybody to follow the prophet. At which time Nathan said, that's interesting, because where I was raised in this church, I was told that one's integrity means standing by what is true, both in private and in public.
Yeah. The way I said it is, brother such and such, that feels to me like a lack of integrity. My understanding is that we should be the same person in private as we should be in public. And he didn't really respond to that. He kind of moved on.
Well, I think over and over again, when we were able to sort of get to the heart of the issue and say, as a mental health worker, I need to invite people to be healthy. That's my moral imperative. That's my professional imperative. And I will encourage them to follow any leader or expert in the field or in the world or in the church, as long as what they're inviting people into is thriving psychologically, relationally, spiritually, mentally, and emotionally. I said, that is my standard. And the interesting thing is, I don't know that he would disagree with me on that.
Well, he didn't.
And then it's almost like we're sort of playing this interesting game of yes, and we need to follow the prophet. And I think what I sort of realized as things unfolded is we are incredibly inconvenient for these poor gentlemen who don't have mental health training and who are deeply loyal and love the church that they serve. And I get that. I understand that. And yet at the same time, we are confronting incredibly complex issues. And I said to this Area Authority 70 as well, I said, listen, we are in the hands of a stake president who is very well-meaning, but does not understand the complexity of what we are going through and the people that I am serving. And every single time I try to address something that's incredibly complex, he demands that I just tell everybody to follow the prophet. I said, that is not an acceptable answer under these particular circumstances.
Right.
We have to allow things that are complex to be complex. And I am bound not only by my professional credentials, honestly, between you and me, those matter to me, but I have long since realized that psychological help and spiritual help are completely aligned. So the conversation ended amicably. I think it was a pretty positive conversation, but at the end of the day, there was no advocacy. There was no support. There was no help. When the summons came to us, I reached out to this Area Authority 70 one more time. I really respect this gentleman. I like him. He's a good man. And I said to him, are you really going to let these gentlemen do this to us? I think you understand the good that we're doing. His response was an appeal to his not having any power to change anything or something like that. I don't specifically remember what he said, but my response I do remember. And I said, I'm not appealing to the line of authority. I'm appealing to your conscience. I think you know that this is wrong. And then we circled back to people suffer and they're in pain, but we need to invite them to pray and read the scriptures and follow the prophet. At which time I put my phone down because I realized that we are alone in the world when it comes to advocacy from these earnest, good gentlemen who really do mean well, but they truly do not understand.
Yeah, I think that's the same conclusion that I've had to come to, is that I have never loved more. I have never been more connected to people. I have never felt more empathy in my whole life than I do now. And one of the things that got back to us secondhand from another person who has advocated for us is that they felt like we weren't humble enough. And look, I'll be the first to admit that I'm not humble enough. I'm a human being. I have an ego just like anybody else does. But I also think it's interesting to use humility as the thing that you're most concerned about, because we've been vilified publicly by a bishop and kept going to church. We were told that our ward essentially didn't want us there, and we kept going to church. We were betrayed, for lack of a better word, by a stake president that we thought was our friend, and we kept going to church. We were being called into meetings and inquisitions by the new stake presidency, and we kept going to church. We had a son that wants to go on a mission, and we love and support him through that, and told we couldn't go to the temple with him, but we kept going to church. And he went to the temple by himself, and we kept going to church. And so, yes, do I have an ego? Yes. Have I been aggressive sometimes in defending Valerie? Yes. But humility, if you're going to stamp me with a crime, I have been active in this church and loved this church. I served faithfully in my calling as a young men's advisor in this church and kept my kids going to church. We have done so much to heal relationships with the church while we have been being vilified by the church. I just don't see that humility is the crime for which I need to go to the chopping block.
I have maybe a unique perspective on this. I wonder sometimes if what that might mean is, under the circumstances, what might it look like for a professional woman with a voice and with confidence and with the courage to sit hour after hour with these gentlemen and to stay in my power and to treat them like equals and to answer over and over again with integrity, with clear understanding, with compassion, and with the powers of articulation of truth and goodness and health and healing. I can only imagine with these gentlemen who don't have this background and this training, that might look and feel like a woman who has stepped out of line. Okay, so just to give a little bit of a summary of what I was trying to communicate with them over and over again. And I will say that depending on the conversation, more or less degrees of success getting to these points, part of the reason being because sometimes once I started to say something, there was kind of almost like an inability to hear or listen or understand or let me pursue further, because we sort of got stuck in the quagmire of obedience versus love, or, follow the prophet and things like that. But if I had any success in these meetings, this is what I was trying to communicate to each and every one of these brethren. The thesis of the whole thing is that Nathan and I are on your team, that our Latter-day Struggles population is absolutely the people who have been traditionally the most devout members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. That is who is attracted to our platform. We do not cause a faith crisis. They come to us because this is deeply a part of their very identities, and they are reeling. They are spinning out and in extreme distress because they don't know how to make sense of what they're experiencing. And so they come to us because they want psychologically sound content and information from people who they trust, because they see that we too love the church. They see that we understand them. We dignify that what they're experiencing makes sense. We don't blame them for having these issues, and we actually let them have the experience that they're having. We acknowledge that what they're experiencing is really scary. These people come overwhelmed. They come sometimes with some pretty significant mental health issues. Some of them have struggled with suicidality, and some of them, well, I'll say a lot of them, are in pretty deep relational distress with their families. And I would try to explain to these brethren that we are reaching a population of people who, without someone walking with them through this, they could spin out further in some pretty significant psychological distress. And this could impact not only themselves, but their families and certainly their marriages. I tried to explain to the brethren that I help people understand and sort of find or make sense of the context in which they find themselves. I help them understand stages of faith. I help them understand that psychological development and spiritual development are both phenomenons that are normal and natural, and what they're experiencing is okay. Oddly enough, I help people see their faith crisis in the context of larger systems. I help them see that human beings have faith crises in all spiritual systems, and that this is not just a Mormon problem. This is a human phenomenon. And in many ways, what this does is oftentimes people are able to sort of loosen their grip on the betrayal that they feel from the church, because they start recognizing that as human beings grow and develop, inevitably they are going to come into a complicated relationship with their earlier stage faith minds. That this isn't necessarily as much about what they specifically were taught as it is that human beings at the beginning of their stages of faith, it's normal to outsource your authority, to kind of want somebody to tell you, what to believe and how to believe it and what to do. And that as they grow and develop, that it's perfectly normal and natural for them to kind of come to a place where they get to decide for themselves who they are and what they believe. I would try to tell these gentlemen that we are trying to teach people how to have a healthy relationship with the church through ideas like differentiation. That the more we are able to hold on to ourselves, the more we are able to be in healthy connection with our communities. And it's okay that we don't believe exactly the same as we were taught earlier on. It's okay that we don't believe the very same as our parents or our partners or our grown children or our church leaders. It's okay, because human beings are supposed to grow and develop and evolve and change. And the beautiful thing is that when these people recognize that this is normal and okay, oftentimes they're like, oh, then I guess I can still be in connection with the church, because it's a whole different paradigm. The stakes are different. I can own myself. I can hold on to that which serves. I can let go of that which doesn't. And as they grow and develop, they recognize that there are things that they have always valued and still value, and that they can still value those things in the context of community. But they can also recognize and sort of embrace the fact that it's okay if they have a different relationship with certain ideas, principles, teachings, and practices. Anything you want to add to that, Nathan, that as far as like what my attempts were to sort of integrate these ideas into my conversations with these priesthood holders, even though, sometimes I didn't get that far, or sometimes it fell on deaf ears?
Well, I think just generally speaking, this is what we're trying to do. I think what you just mapped out is a really nice summary of the objectives of our platform: saving marriages, saving relationships between parents and children, between people and siblings and extended families, and even saving the relationship between families and the church. And one time you were asked, well, show me a podcast where you told people to stay in the church. And your answer is, counselors don't do that. Counselors don't tell people what to do. Counselors help people think through, their own identities, their own powers, their own belief systems, and then to make healthy choices for themselves. What they wanted you to do was to be another bishop. And they didn't understand that that is not what counselors do. And so when you say, I don't have a podcast telling people to stay in the church, they took that as an offense. Like, see, we knew it. Yeah. We knew you're an enemy to the church, or you would tell people to stay. But that's not how counseling works.
Something else that I feel very strongly about, that I maintain to this moment, is that I care enough about each and every one of you that I will not do this behind closed doors if I can do this on a public platform where I can reach infinitely more human beings that otherwise would not know where to go or to whom to turn. And it hurts my heart that over and over again, in one way or another, what I was told is, do whatever you need to do to help people be healthy in private, but your public face needs to be endorsing the church. And to me, that is such a scary condemnation of where we are headed. And I refuse to comply with that, because I feel as if I have the ability to help thousands of people find healing. And if I can help thousands of people through this public platform, then why in the world would I limit myself? It kind of reminds me of like that, putting one's light under a bushel or letting my light so shine. And I also maintain to these earnest brethren that were so worried that people that are in crisis resonate with what you and I are doing and my other guests. And if this is not something that an individual is seeking out, or if they're not having a crisis, then that is perfectly fine. They are not my audience, and I am absolutely okay, and I'm more than okay if they don't listen to my content.
Right.
And that's okay, and that everybody has the ability as human beings to decide for themselves what serves them. What I think would be good, Nathan, is I know that you and I were talking about this. You had mentioned to me in your preparation and your ponderings kind of an overview of what we received in terms of responses.
Right.
As we were trying so like diligently to explain our hearts and to explain how much we cared about this population and the health of the system itself. Walk us through, if you would, what you noticed, or what like kind of an overarching summary of what the responses were.
Yeah. So as we would talk about mental health in the church and how some of the doctrines and policies and practices in the church are contributing to some of the mental health problems in the church, we got a lot of different responses. So we actually had a former bishop who talked to us, and after a few minutes said to us, "You're absolutely right. When I was a bishop, I didn't know how to handle these things. I'm really glad there were mental health people that I could ask questions to. And I'm sorry that you're having trouble, but keep doing what you're doing. It's really important." So one former bishop was really understanding and very thoughtful.
Well, he actually said, this was so healing, I'll never forget this. He said, "I have the luxury to be pretty far removed from the pain and suffering of people in the church because of what he does professionally." He said, "I spent a few years as a bishop experiencing a little bit of what you, Valerie, experience all day, every day." He said, "So how arrogant would it be of me to assume that I know how to tell you how to do your job?" He said, "So please carry on and keep doing it." And this is a lovely conversation, because at the beginning of the conversation, I think he was a little bit more closed. And by the time we finished talking, he endorsed the work. And he really, I don't know, I felt like that was so like 1 in a million for us, that he said, "Please carry on."
Yeah. So another response that we got, and we've kind of talked about this one already, is there's not a problem. The church may have a mental health thing here or there, but it's not a ubiquitous problem. And so unless the prophet says that this is a problem and provides a solution, that's all I'm looking for.
We heard also that if people are having a problem, then they are lacking in faith, and they need to try harder, do better, follow the prophets more, be more on the covenant path. And so this idea that like, if the problem exists, it falls in the lap of the people that are suffering.
Right. Another person that we talked to acknowledged the mental health problems in the church, but literally said to us, "There's nothing you can do, and we're going to have to be okay with some suicides."
We were accused of actually causing pain, causing faith crisis, weakening the church, which we tried directly to respond to, that we are addressing issues that are existing, and that because of the advent of the internet, what people are experiencing has been quite public for now going on. Gosh, we're up to 2.5 decades now. Yeah.
Years, I mean, fine.
And so we maintain that we are not causing a problem. We are addressing a problem, because not addressing the problem or pretending like it doesn't exist does not make it go away, but it does make people go away who feel as if their pain and suffering is not being addressed or treated as if it is real and valid.
Yeah. We talked about another response, which was to counsel people privately to follow best mental health practices, even if it's not what the church teaches, but then in public to support the church's policies and doctrines over best mental health practices. We've touched on that one already.
Something else that just was really challenging for me to kind of hear, and something that was part of the extended conversation I had with this current stake president, is where is one allowed to feel their pain? If one is in a faith or a trust crisis, is it okay to talk about this in church? And of course, I would maintain that a safe community is one where people show up and they are nurtured in their wrestle in the church community. And we were told in that setting that the second hour gospel doctrine and Relief Society priesthood is not an appropriate place to express one's doubts, because this is a place for comfort and to strengthen one's faith. And so as this conversation unfolded, the follow-up question was, well, then where does one go if you don't want them to go to a mental health professional like Valerie's podcast, but you also don't want them to express what they're really feeling in church? And what sort of unfolded was, do you just want them to go away?
Right.
And of course, they would deny that that was what they want, but in essence, it feels as if that is what is sort of being communicated, which is we don't want to address that this is happening. And we would prefer that if it is happening, that we don't have to deal with it one way or another. And that kind of leads me to my next tactic is, is that we punish the people that are addressing this crisis.
Right. So in other words, when you don't know the answer, and these responses that we're talking about here, the reason why we're presenting them is not to be critical of leaders. It's to demonstrate that nobody really knows what to do.
It's very complicated.
It is complicated, and some of our policies and doctrines cause mental health problems, and people don't know what to do. So they deny it, or they're okay with suicides, or they tell us to deny our integrity. You can't talk about it at church, but now you can't talk about it outside of church. And so they just don't know what to do. And so what they end up doing is killing the messenger.
I feel honored that I get to stay in this place and have these conversations with these gentlemen, because I feel compassion on the complexity of this and their conundrum. And we're going to go deeper into that in our next Monday's episode. We do have validation for how there is, in fact, space, at least formally, through public discourse given by leaders of this very church, that what we are trying to bring forward through the Latter-day Struggles podcast, that it's possible to endorse this, and that there are people that really see what's going on and at least in some way, shape, or form want somebody to address it. Nathan and I are going to each read a couple of quotes by current and past apostles and prophets. Elder James E. Faust says, as a means of coming to truth, people in the church are encouraged by their leaders to think and find out for themselves. They are encouraged to ponder, to search, to evaluate, and thereby to come to such knowledge of the truth as their own consciences, assisted by the Spirit of God, lead them to discover.
And then another quote from Elder Holland. He said, in this church, there is an enormous amount of room and scriptural commandment for studying and learning and comparing and considering, for discussion and waiting for further revelation. We all learn line upon line, precept upon precept, with the goal being authentic religious faith informing genuine Christ-like living. In this, there is no place for coercion or manipulation, no place for intimidation or hypocrisy.
Elder Hugh B. Brown says the following: truth is often found in the most unexpected places. He must, with fearless and open mind, insist that facts are far more important than any cherished mistaken beliefs, no matter how unpleasant the facts are or how delightful the beliefs.
Okay, also from Hugh B. Brown, more thinking is required, and we should all exercise our God-given right to think and be unafraid to express our opinions, with proper respect for those to whom we talk and proper acknowledgement of our own shortcomings. We must preserve freedom of the mind in the church and resist all efforts to suppress it. The church is not so much concerned with whether the thoughts of its members are orthodox or heterodox as it is that we all shall have thoughts.
And finally, this is by Elder Joseph B. Wordland. Some are lost because they are different. They feel as though they don't belong. Perhaps because they are different, they find themselves slipping away from the flock. They may look, act, think, and speak differently than those around them, and that sometimes causes them to assume they don't fit. They conclude that they are not needed. Tied to this misconception is the erroneous belief that all members of the church should look, talk, and be alike. The Lord did not people the earth with a vibrant orchestra of personalities only to value the piccolos of the world. Every instrument is precious and adds to the complex beauty of the symphony. All of Heavenly Father's children are different in some degree, yet each has his own beautiful sound that adds depth and richness to the whole. This variety of creation itself is a testament of how the Lord values his children. He does not esteem one flesh above another, but he inviteth them all to come unto him and partake of his goodness, and he denieth none that come unto him, black and white, bond and free, male and female. All are alike unto God. Nathan, before we close with these testimonials, what do these thoughts bring up in you as we read these aloud to our audience?
Well, it brings up in me that there are at least a number of church leaders who value independent thought and who value the journey that, is what faith and life should be. That a big part of our growth process is, in fact, the process. And it can be hard. And what we think today may not be what we think in 2 years from now. But the point is not to be critical of people's points of view, but it's to allow them to develop those views, to think them, to try them out, to see how they work in real life, and then to adjust as you go. But what Elder Holland said specifically is you can't coerce that process. You cannot manipulate that process. It's really important that people be allowed to go on a journey for themselves. That's what I kind of get out of those ideas.
Thank you. Yes. So what we want to do when we close is offer to you, this was sort of our last effort. I realized that perhaps if anything could penetrate their hearts, it might be the fruits of our labors. What are the people whom we serve saying about their own experience? And so I reached out to just one group, and I've worked with many groups, and my people in my groups are so good to us that I knew that if we just reached out to one and said, Mayday, Mayday, we need your support, that they would come running, and they did. And the following that Nathan and I are going to read are excerpts of the letters that I sent to the entire stake presidency, our current bishop, and to the Area Authority 70 as this timeline unfolded. And my thoughts were, surely, as they hear the experiences of these people, our own Latter-day Saint family. This will penetrate whatever fear is blocking their ability to listen to me and Nathan and understand our hearts and understand what we're trying to accomplish here. And actually, quite frankly, what we are accomplishing amongst our beloved brothers and sisters here in the faith journey in and around the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And so here we go. We're going to just read a handful of these letters. I think I want to preface this by saying this part of our podcast episode is in some ways, it's the most touching, and I definitely will get emotional here and there, but also I feel a little bit vulnerable because I don't want this to come across as a self-aggrandizing, isn't Valerie great sort of thing. That's not what this is about. This is about our trying to bear witness of the sacred nature of the work that we're doing in an effort to help these earnest, frightened gentlemen understand the nature of our hearts and the sacred work that we're doing. Okay, here we go.
The first one says, "Thank you from the bottom of my heart. I really needed this podcast. I listen to a lot of church podcasts, and this has been the most eye-opening for me. I'm the bishop of an Orthodox ward. I've been really struggling with the traditional cultural orthodoxy of do as you're told, nothing more, nothing less. This podcast has been a breath of fresh air to me. My wife and I have our struggles with the church, more so how people perceive doctrine and instruction and seem to find that more important than being kind, loving, and respectful of others. The podcast has really helped, and I have found it faith promoting, not damaging. It has helped me to see the church through an extra layer of complexity rather than naivety. And now I choose to love it and the community despite the complexity and messiness, whilst also giving me the resolve to want to continue to reform where I can help steer the culture of the ward in a healthier direction. You're definitely called to help people challenge the status quo of their own faith journey and take more control of how they choose to live their faith and use their God-given gift of personal discernment to help guide them on their journey. You're amazing, and I'm looking forward to future episodes. Thank you for doing this wonderful work."
Here's the second letter. Several years ago, I was ready to walk away from the church completely. My faithful husband was heartbroken. Our marriage felt like it was on the brink. Through this podcast, I realized that there were people uniquely gifted with and called to the work of ministering to people like me. Thanks to the Hamakers and the support group we attended for a period of time, my husband and I, for the first time in a long marriage, are able to learn the language and vocabulary to understand each other when it comes to matters of faith. Instead of avoiding the conflict around religion or screaming at each other or just being plain heartbroken, we learned to listen with patience, charity, and long-suffering. I have heard, seen, and learned invaluable new skills for expanding my sight and seeing with new vision. I am an active member of the church today as a direct result of the efforts of the Hamakers and people like them who sacrifice their times, talents, and everything they possess for the sake of going after the lost sheep like me. Please don't forget about the lost sheep like me, about the men and the women with an issue of faith like me, many of whom suffer spiritually, emotionally, and physically for years and are sometimes treated like lepers by their LDS communities. People like me who reach out in faith and desperation to resources like the Hamakers to see if, by some miracle, we can touch the hem of the Master's healing garment and once again know what it feels like to be healthy and whole. Thank you for listening. I pray that you'll have the guidance of the Holy Spirit as you follow the footsteps of our Savior, who always passionately pursued the broken, outcast, and sinners like me.
The next one. In 2020, I got hit with a faith crisis and was completely disoriented. I turned to my ward and stake leaders for spiritual direction. They encouraged me to pray and read my scriptures. I asked if there were any resources for this happening, and there were not. I begged for us to have a curriculum that could help people who experience faith deconstruction and was assured that this was not possible. I fasted and prayed and anguished. In 2022, I discovered the Latter-day Struggles podcast with Valerie and Nathan. It was so therapeutic to hear a mental health practitioner talk openly about aspects of our church that have caused me and my family pain and trauma. Because I've been raised that most people are either all in or all out of the church, I thought these were my only two options. As I was leaning towards leaving the church, I heard that Valerie and Nathan were doing support groups. My husband and I joined one of her support groups in 2023. Our minds were blown. We talked about healthy ways that we could stay in the church and still deal with the pain and trauma in a mature way. Valerie gave us the tools to deal with our feelings. I had gone to an LDS therapist before, and Valerie's approach is completely unique and different. She empowers people to make independent decisions rather than telling them what to do. If I had not been in Valerie and Nathan's support group, I would be out of the church. It is that simple. Because of them, I know how to handle hard general conference talks and other things that are difficult to deal with.
The next one is as follows. In my family, when our faith crisis started, I was concerned that there would be no one left standing, going to church, and there are 7 of us in our immediate family. Thanks to Valerie, the majority have been able to stay. Even more importantly, the relationships with those that have chosen not to stay are actually better now than they were before our faith crisis even started. Several other families around us have also been able to navigate their own faith crises in such a way that they have become stronger than when they started. Missionaries from this group have gone forth with more faith and hope. They've taught with greater faith in Christ, and others have followed the invitation to come into Christ. For those who have not chosen to stay, the relationships are far less strained and hurt than they otherwise would have been. My thoughts are heavy because I worry that there is a desire among some to try to punish Valerie and Nathan for being brave and using their gifts to address the things that they are addressing. To this, I would like to remind you of the words that we hear in hymns and scripture. How blessed the day when the lamb and the lion shall lie down together without any ire. This only happens when the lion stops viewing the lamb as his prey, and the lamb is not fearful that he will be killed by the lion. You are in a position to execute your desires on the Hammakers. You could satisfy this ravenous hunger of the lion and hurt someone that has no ability to defend themselves in this situation. You might even think that it is a brave thing to do or something that needs to be done to protect the church. Peter likely also felt this way when he cut off the ear of the soldier who was coming to take the Savior. But such action, I believe, is not needed and will actually end up doing far more harm than the good you hope to accomplish. Similarly, I would ask that you turn your swords into plowshares and spears into pruning hooks. You may see some things differently than they do, and I would submit that this is okay. You are the ones that can hold the sword or spear and figuratively hurt them. But if you follow the Savior's example and allow the heat and the pressure of the situation to mold the sword or spear from a weapon of war into an instrument of peace and prosperity like a plowshare or a pruning hook, I think you will find that thousands upon thousands will be greatly blessed by your efforts and the efforts of the Hammakers. There are so many like my family that can increase their faith and hope in Christ by having the avenues that the Hammakers have developed to help navigate a faith crisis. I would plead with you to choose to see the beauty of who the Hammakers are, what gifts they have to offer us, and so many other families like my own that have had no other place to turn. It is because of the gifts that they have shared that we have been able to stay. Those of us that have benefited from what the Hammakers are sharing have all often exhausted all other efforts to try to stay. But what they are doing is giving a space for people to honestly process and work through hard things in such a way that there is an option to heal our hearts and minds and be able to stay. I want to make it clear that the Hammakers are not causing any faith crisis in anyone. Faith crises have been raging long before Valerie and Nathan began to share their experiences. But different from others, they have created a way for people to navigate a faith crisis and stay.
All right, the next letter. Because of Valerie and Nathan's support, our family found new hope and direction. We learned how to embrace a broader and more nuanced understanding of faith, which helped us remain connected to the church even when our experiences didn't align perfectly with traditional expectations. Their support has kept us grounded, and we are still active members of the church today. Without their help, we believe our family was on a clear path out of the church. We hope you will consider the meaningful healing work that they do as an essential part of the faith journey of many people like us who have struggled and to reconcile personal experiences with traditional church narratives. Their work has truly been a blessing in our lives, and we are deeply grateful for the peace, clarity, and hope that they have helped us find.
The next letter is as follows. As someone who has closely observed her efforts as well as participated in her processing groups, I believe it is essential to clarify the true nature of Valerie's work, especially in light of any misconceptions that may arise. Valerie's approach is rooted in promoting mental and emotional health. She provides a space where those facing faith struggles can process their emotions and experiences in a healthy, constructive manner. Her podcast, Latter-day Struggles, emphasizes open dialogue and offers psychological insights that help individuals develop a balanced and healthy relationship with both their faith and their family members. It is a crucial resource for those who may feel isolated or confused on their spiritual journeys, offering both empathy and practical tools for maintaining familial harmony while undergoing personal growth. From an outside perspective, it may appear that Valerie's discussions challenge certain aspects of faith, but it is critical to recognize that her goal is not to undermine belief or devotion. Rather, she is committed to helping individuals confront the natural doubts and questions that arise within one's spiritual development. In doing so, Valerie equips her listeners to navigate these struggles with greater psychological strength, enabling them to strengthen their relationship with both their faith and their loved ones. In a time when many people, especially within religious communities, are seeking to reconcile deeply held beliefs with personal and cultural challenges, Valerie's work is invaluable. Her focus is always on fostering health, resilience, and connection, whether that is within oneself, one's family, or within one's spiritual community. I have seen firsthand how her thoughtful guidance has helped people make peace with their faith struggles, drawing them closer to their families, and in some cases, helping them rediscover their relationship with their faith in a more authentic and sustaining way. Valerie's contributions are a gift to those in need of compassionate support, and her work is a vital resource for maintaining psychological and emotional well-being within this LDS community.
The Hammakers are constantly talking about how much they love the gospel and value their place in the church. They are preparing their son to serve a mission. These are not the actions of a couple who are dangerous to the church. Valerie holds no ecclesiastical authority, so she should not be punished for not advancing the church's interests. She does hold a professional licensure, so she is ethically and legally bound to follow accepted practices within her field and should not be punished for doing so. I urge you to reconsider the course of your action you have threatened. We are a church of covenants, not creeds. As Valerie and Nathan have kept their covenants, they should remain in full fellowship despite whatever doctrinal disagreements they may have with their fellow saints. They are doing an important work to heal the wounded and are helping to build Zion in their own way. Please allow them to continue to do so.
The Hammakers' support, guidance, love, insight, and mentorship have made all of the difference. Their work offers a sorely needed beacon of hope for so many struggling. Through Valerie's resources, insights, and support, I gained the skills I needed to effectively and healthily navigate my faith crisis, which has done nothing short of save my life. In all seriousness, what Valerie offers not only blesses lives, but saves lives, as these struggles can be so difficult that it can lead people to feel suicidal. Valerie has given me the tools I need to be able to stay in the church. Without her, I'd have had a drastically higher chance of leaving. She gave me a lifeboat when I needed it most and truly didn't know where I would be without her. Through Valerie's mentorship and the tools I learned from her, I have become closer to Christ, have deepened my spirituality and faith instead of virtually losing it altogether. If Valerie were to push people that were at this level of fragility with their faith to stay in the church, it would without a doubt have the opposite effect of causing them to be more likely to leave. Instead, she offers them hope and gives them tools to navigate the new level of complexity to their faith, allowing their faith not only to survive, but to eventually thrive again. I've experienced it myself and owe so much of that success to her work. Words cannot do justice to the gift that the Hamakers are to this community of members who are working through difficulties and challenges to their faith. But I hope the words I've shared will be taken and considered seriously because they are true.
Valerie and Nathan relate to others with emotional safety skills that can create a space to think, speak, and process thoughts, experiences, and traumas with trust. They respect agency. This respect strengthens the individual and gives them room to seek personal revelation for their decisions. Never have they ever made me feel like I should leave the church. They always made me feel trusted and respected, and they genuinely valued my faith. Valerie and Nathan are both very genuine, loving, and lovely individuals who care about the faith community in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
I have been a lifelong sixth-generation member of the church. I have held callings such as a temple ordinance worker, stake seminary teacher, and I've served in the primary, young women's, and in Relief Society presidencies. My connection with the church is a core of my character. I did not seek a faith crisis, but I had one just the same. And when I did, I was petrified, confused, deeply saddened, and felt utterly alone. Since no one in the church seemed to be open to conversation with me about it, and my bishop, as much as he wanted to be helpful, had no personal experiences with faith crisis, I did not know where to go. I began to search for resources and for people who understood. I was not remotely interested in listening to or aligning with any resources that were antagonistic towards the church. I did not want to listen to anyone who did not appreciate or show deep respect and love towards this institution that I have loved all of my life. I wanted someone who could help me find the way to address what I was feeling without the need to separate myself from the church. The Latter-day Struggles podcast became that resource. Valerie chooses to work with a demographic of saints who are more or less ignored, misunderstood, or sometimes even misjudged, out of connection with many inside of the church. Valerie leaves the 90 and 9. She finds us. She invites us to belong, to be heard, to be healed, and to be renewed through the love of Jesus Christ.
It brings tears to my eyes as I write this because I was desperately looking for a lifeline that was not bashing the church that I love and have been a part of my whole life. I was so relieved and grateful that I stumbled onto the Latter-day Struggles podcast. As I listened intently, I felt so seen and so much comfort, and that maybe it was possible to have these complex issues with the church and still find the good and to be able to navigate my growing faith. One thing that I love about Valerie and Nathan is that they create a space for all people, and I have never felt swayed to leave the church. I felt loved and accepted by them, regardless of where I was in my belief. It was beyond refreshing and created a safe place for me to figure things out. I signed up to be in one of Valerie's 6-month faith expansion groups, and it literally saved me. I was experiencing much confusion and anguish, and being in her group made all the difference in me being able to get my footing again and move forward, even though my worldview was changing. My experience of Valerie and Nathan is that they always approach tough topics and issues with love, similar to how I believe the Savior would approach things. Valerie and Nathan love the people in the church and want nothing more than to help them. I believe that we all see the world through different eyes based on our lived experience, and that Nathan and Valerie are vigorously trying to help bridge the gap so that we can stay followers of Christ. My spirituality has grown since working with Valerie in a way that I couldn't find in church buildings anymore like I had in the past. She has taught me how to stay connected to myself and my spirituality. I don't see God as scary anymore. I don't feel shame about not being enough like I used to. I was suffering and she mourned with me and comforted me. Valerie has helped me heal my heart and my relationship with God and the Savior. Valerie and Nathan have created a safe space where it is safe to talk about troubling topics, and I am forever grateful to them for having the courage to do so. They are beautiful human beings, and they have helped me grow and heal.
I am here to testify to the healing and faith-promoting work Valerie and Nathan Hamaker are engaged in. They use their training, skills, and gifts to see and listen to the wounded, including me. After serving for decades, starting as a Young Women's Class president, a primary teacher, and a Young Women's leader, a Ward Relief Society president, and a Stake Relief Society president, the mother of a full-time missionary, a bishop's wife, a stickler for rules. If you had asked me if I would ever have found myself in a position to question whether or not the church was true or whether God was real, I would have vehemently had said no, never, which is probably precisely what you would say right now, this very minute yourself. Through the blessings of the Holy Ghost, I was led to Valerie's podcast. She saw me. She saw that I was wounded. She also saw the plight for what it was. I was in a place of potential growth. It wasn't a crisis. I was precisely on time for my spiritual growth. She helped me to see this. She helped me see that my faith is not dead. My faith is found in putting off my rigid natural man. Faith was found where it was placed by my Maker, right within my soul. It was my connection to my Savior given to me by my heavenly parents. By not being afraid to acknowledge the church as areas for improvement, Valerie has helped me see that I do not need to leave the church. It did not need to be a binary choice. More importantly, she showed me that there are truly Christ-like and loving people inside the church. What would happen if the very church that she taught me to love again reprimanded her for her Christ-like love and care? The thing is, you have power, the power to heal or the power to prove that the church is not Christ-like. You have the power to show thousands of people who have been positively impacted for good because of Valerie and Nathan Hamaker that they are right, that our church isn't perfect, but it is a place where children of God can find a home on their quest to become perfect. I believe you will see me for what I am. I am a modern-day woman at the well, a paralytic at Bethesda. I am a woman with an issue of blood. I am the blind beggar, Bartholomeus. I am Lazarus. Please act with love and mercy. Okay, I appreciate that that was quite a few testimonials, but I feel that perhaps these are the most powerful and important things that we will share with you tonight, because this is what gives me the confidence to carry on. I am not deterred one bit by the unfolding of current events. I know that what we are doing is right. Our scripture teaches us, but by their fruits we shall know them. And I feel honored and grateful that I am able to be even just a small part of the healing of this community. And if and when the institution itself and its leadership comes to realize the part that we play in the restoration of goodness, truth, light, and love here in this community, then I will continue to rejoice and welcome them back into fellowship. And in the meantime, I'm going to carry on.
Amen. I think it's really powerful, these testimonies, because so many of these friends of ours really shared vulnerable things, very painful things about their own journeys and experiences, and they were willing to share them on our behalf because of how much we've learned to love each other and because of how important they feel this work has been in their lives and how much they would like for it to continue. And I want to just echo what Valerie said, that we didn't read these in an effort to build ourselves up or make ourselves into something that we're not. We're just people who have read and who have talked and who have had the courage to take on some challenging issues that were already there. But I think that I have learned from participating in a handful of the groups, and I don't participate in everything that Valerie does, but even in the handful of groups I've participated in, I've had so many people just reach out to me personally and say, thank you for doing this. What are you reading? Can you teach me how to meditate? Can you teach me how to find resources and things? And this isn't even my thing, you know? I'm sort of riding on the coattails of a much greater intellectual and spiritual giant in this area, but it is an honor to participate in that. And when people reach out and say, thank you, you have saved my life, you have saved my family, you have saved my church life, I don't know how to stop. And I know that this makes some people uncomfortable, as we've already touched on. And I think there's probably an element where people haven't gone through these experiences. And so when their lived experience isn't necessarily the same as other people's, it's hard to relate to what's going on. And unfortunately, sometimes assumptions are made. And there's really no way in 2 or 3 hour interviews that Valerie and I could relate to any person all of the beautiful transformation that we're seeing and how people are keeping their faith in God, keeping their faith in their own goodness, and finding a really meaningful purpose in life. And in many, many cases, choosing to continue a relationship with the church as they go on their faith journey. We can't relate that in a 1 hour or 2 hour or 3 hour meeting. And so I think that it's unfair sometimes for one group to pass judgment on another group when there's really no way that they can be on equal footing in terms of experiential understanding. But like Valerie said, I also forgive and give grace to good people who are well-meaning and trying to do the best that they can with what they've been told they are supposed to do. I understand how they think and how they feel, because 5 years ago, I would have approached this the same way myself. If I had not been through a faith expansion myself, I would be seeing through those same eyes. So I understand that. And I give them grace. And I want this ultimately to end well for everybody. I think it is unfortunate that we were called to a church court over these particular issues, but I'm not mad. I'm not angry. I want to continue to participate in meaningful ways in the positive mission of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, to spread the love of Jesus Christ, to teach some of its really beautiful doctrines, that we have heavenly parents, that we are children of God, that we are divine, and our potential is to become like God. We have so many beautiful doctrines that can really bless people's lives. And I want to continue to participate in that way, even if I'm asked to do it by my leaders from the outside.
Thank you, babe. What is going to follow for the next couple of episodes is we are going to do a question answer episode on Friday for all of our full content listeners. If you are somebody that would like to participate in that, reach out to my assistant at admin@latterdaystruggles.com, or you can jump onto my Instagram. My Instagram handle is Latter-day Struggles Podcast. And go ahead and ask your questions, or if you have comments, do so there sooner rather than later, because I have a fantastic post-production editor who needs that content pretty quickly so that she can turn it around and get it to everybody in the next few days. And then on Monday, part 3 of this series is what Nathan and I would like to talk about. Is I have done a great deal of pondering and thinking, and I would like to just do sort of a little bit of a psychological assessment of, like, why is it that our priesthood leaders are acting the way they're acting? Why do we pose such a threat trying to do well by our loved ones in the church and the church itself? Why is it that we are received as we are? And so I wanted to sort of break that down with you all. After that, we're going to be talking about why Nathan and I chose to resign our membership as opposed to going through the membership council itself. And then at the end, we would like to spend some time talking about why Nathan and I have decided to preemptively offer love, compassion, and forgiveness to our brothers, these leaders of the church. And there's a lot we want to say about that. And that may be one of the more important parts of the work that we do right now. We want to embody to all of you that perfect love casts out fear, and that God, our parents, love each and every one of their children infinitely, and that we are asked in this life to learn how to love as they do. And what an honor and a privilege it is that Nathan and I have a chance to return fear with love and to truly show through our own lives that we want to be examples of truly what it looks like to be a disciple of Jesus Christ. And so we'll go deeply into that, to our process, to our reasons, and to how we are able to achieve that in the face of what could potentially be something that could really cripple us and our ability to do the work that we're here to do. And so we will leave you with that, sending each and every one of you our love and gratitude that you are here with us on the journey, and close by saying, and I truly mean this, we have no regrets. I am honored every day of my life that I closed my successful little private practice down and surrendered so much just to be able to do this beautiful, sacred, important, scary work. And I am honored that I get to be here with you. So thank you for being my people, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Latter-day Struggles. Your support for this podcast is extremely valuable to us. If Valerie's work has made an impact in your life, please consider leaving a 5-star rating and review. For info on webinars, classes, support groups, and live events, click the link in today's show notes or visit our website at latterdaystruggles.com. Latter-day Struggles is a proud member of the Dialogue Podcasting Network.
Dialogue Podcast Network.